Well, good morning, everybody. It's exciting to see you here. Thanks for coming out, getting up early on a Saturday morning, and ignoring all the other things that you need to do at home. I really appreciate that you're here with us. So this is what we hope to be the first annual State of the Climate here for Lancaster. And what I want to go over today is pretty simple. First, we need to know where we are. Where are we starting in this journey with climate change? And what can we do about that? And then I want to end with what makes Lancaster really unique in this work. So, beginning with Lancaster's climate baseline, I always like to show this image. This is called the climate stripes. You might have seen some of these before. But the idea here is that each vertical line represents just 1 year of temperature. And the temperature then is compared to the average temperature from 1895 to present day. And the redness or blueness of that bar represents how far above or below that year was compared to the overall average. So this is Lancaster. You can clearly see that there's a warming trend over this time period. I'll also throw up this image as well. This is the whole globe. So you can see that Lancaster is buffered from many of these different climate impacts here. We live in a bit of a climate haven. So even as many of the temperatures ramp up all across the globe, we're sheltered from that, at least presently here to some extent. But it doesn't mean that climate impacts aren't already happening here. We see warmer weather, heavier storms, a shift in agricultural seasons. Goodness, it was 85 degrees yesterday in mid-April. We see increased pest pressures, future population changes as well as this becomes that haven. I don't have a photo of the disappointment on my children's faces as we put the sleds away for the year without them using it. But this is what we're in for more of here in Lancaster. So to get a better sense of where we are, we wanted to count a lot of stuff. We wanted to count emissions. So we at RegenAll developed the first greenhouse gas inventory for the county. So these are analyses of emissions. We worked with an organization called ICLEI, which supports lots of local governments in this kind of work. And also, Scott Standish was our community partner at the county, which we're really grateful for his leadership there. And I'd also like to thank contributing authors, recent grads, Sophia Martin and Maddie Hulbig from F&M, who helped to really pull a lot of this work together. So what this does, we looked primarily at Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions categories. So these are things that we combusted, or plants and trees that are here within the boundary of Lancaster. And then Scope 2 also brings in like energy that was produced somewhere else and came into Lancaster. So that's the idea of what the boundary is around the inventory. And like I said, inventories are kind of, they're fun. They're a little boring. It's a lot of counting things. So we got utility bills from PP&L and UGI. We've got data from wastewater treatment plants, from PennDOT on vehicle miles traveled and the numbers of vehicle registrations here in Lancaster. And this isn't actually as cool of a word as it looks, a fulu. It's agricultural, forestry, and other land use. That section is usually pretty weak in a lot of greenhouse gas inventories, but because of the importance of agriculture here in Lancaster, we really wanted to strengthen that. So we pulled in different modules from EPA and the National Agricultural Statistics Service. A few of the limitations of this work, we didn't have specific factor sets for emissions. So like how clean or dirty is the energy that was produced just here for Lancaster. So we needed to use averages for the PJM section of the grid. And there's some other places where we needed to rely on some estimates for state or local average, or state or national averages. And we also did not manage to account for Scope 3. So these are the things that you consume in your homes, purchasing choices that you make. So that's an area of future expansion. And then also the carbon sequestration that's accounted for is only of forests, so it's not of other living things that are here in the county. So this is what it looks like. This is the raw data from it. You can see that we have really large emissions from both industrial and transportation sectors, and then fairly even across residential, commercial, and agriculture. Then the removals are help from trees that are sequestering different amounts of carbon as well. So we'll slice and dice this in a bunch of different ways. I think it's also helpful to see a pie chart of that to visualize better where emissions are coming from and the relative magnitudes to each other. The bottom of the line emissions number is here, about 10.5 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And if you're like me and most people, this is just a really big number, and it doesn't mean a lot to you, even if you think about this stuff every day. So I found this image really helpful. This is what a ton of CO2 looks like. These folks visualized it as a time bomb because of the long-term impact it has on our atmosphere. And just a refresher from high school, the reason that this is important is because as we increase the concentration of CO2 and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, we see temperatures rise. It's like an insulating blanket that keeps us warm, and it's a good thing it does, because otherwise we'd be really cold. So it's good that we have an atmosphere, and it's good that we have greenhouse gases that act the way that they do, but we just have too many, and the concentrations are rising too fast. I'll also mention that we're talking about CO2. There's a lot of other greenhouse gases. There's methane, nitrous oxide, and they're all grouped together. What we typically do is refer to those as CO2 equivalents. So they have different weights and importance, like a methane or nitrous oxide are a many-time multiplier over CO2 in their ability to warm the Earth. But we report that all as CO2 equivalents. So all of those things are captured in our emissions numbers. The other thing that we did with our inventory, and the full document of this is available on the RegenAll website, is because we had the quantities of fuels that people are burning in their homes, we wanted to count that up and see how much it costs. And this is something that I just feel is really powerful. We spend $2.5 billion every year as a county on fossil fuels. And because we don't have mining or other extraction industries here, that's all just moving out of the county, you know? So we're all really proud of the extraordinary give and the charitable work that we do as a community. But this is an extraordinary give every other day to fossil fuels outside our county. So you just put that all into perspective and think about the vastness of amount of money that we're talking about here. And just imagine for a bit, and we'll get into this later, but all of the things that you'd rather do with that money in your homes at a larger scale in our community. So let's dive into the pie chart again. And I want to break this apart a bit. So I have both the commercial and industrial energy sectors colored blue, but I also want you to imagine that a portion of the transportation is also split between residential and more commercial kind of things, so your cars and then big trucks on the highway. And so let's split that all off. And if we look at this way, we can see there's about 51% of the emissions here in the county are things that Lancaster businesses control in some way or another. And similarly, we can look at the new residential transportation sector and residential energy. These orange sections are things that households control. So these are our choices that we make in our homes. And then finally, the agriculture, forestry, and other land use section. There's about 9% of emissions that are controlled by Lancaster Farms. Remember, that had the removals as part of the pie chart here, so that's actually about 6% bigger, so somewhere in the 15% neighborhood is coming from ag. And then Loxwama, you're important too, but these three areas are really where emissions are coming from in the county. And so with that foundational understanding of where emissions are coming from and their magnitude, we can start to think more about what to do about it. So as Dave said, I've had a vision for much more localized climate action. I've gotten a really awesome opportunity over the past 6-7 years to be working with a company called Team Ag in Ephrata, doing a lot of conservation ag work. My background training is as an engineer. And so I'm doing some of that work, but also helped to launch a regenerative ag division because of the focus and interest that I had in climate. And the clarity that I gained from wonderful organizations like Project Drawdown that shone a light on how important land and food are, and the amazing climate solutions that exist within those areas. So that's why I started at Team Ag. And through that work, I got to have a lot of conversations with farmers about climate change. And I got to see how when we're talking about issues like that are contentious and really challenging at a national level, when we bring it to your farm, to your family, and we're having these conversations here together in a local context, it just really changes the dynamics. And I've had really productive conversations, and farmers are making incredible climate contributions right here in Lancaster. And so it really helped me to see a different strategy than what we might hope for at a national level, but for a much more local climate context. And to see that in a way that measurably improves lives and strengthens local communities, creates jobs, because there's a lot of work that we need to do, is a bridge between rural and urban communities, builds bipartisan collaborations, and shifts us from this sense of hopelessness to abundance and real results, that things are actually happening, that these changes that we've wanted to see are actually possible here on the ground. And so this is the background and foundation for where RegenAll came from. We identify and implement local climate solutions for a more resilient future. We do that in a number of different ways, and you'll see parts of these through the talk. We feel it's really important to have that backbone organization to provide leadership and vision to where we could go, and that there's a group working to put a hand up and say, we want resources to come into the community to do this. There's incredible new federal funding available for climate change, and if nobody's saying, over here, it's not gonna come. So we need to bring those funds down to Lancaster. And then we need to see really exciting projects take off and get going. So I want to give a context then for how we see this work emerging. And it's this view that's been really core to what we're doing, bringing forward a solutions-focused mindset. So saying, like, there are solutions to this. We know what to do. Let's do it. We've been working with faculty and students at both F&M and Millersville over the past couple of years to localize different climate solutions. It's an effort to understand what's the capacity of these particular solutions. Like if we did this to the maximum, what would happen? Like how much of this particular solution could work here? And how does that all come together in the bigger climate picture? And we're not going to dive into that too far today, but one of my takeaways from it is there's a path for us. There's a path to carbon neutrality across a wide array of solutions. And it's not just like single big solutions, it's small contributions from lots of different things. And one of the things that has been core to the drawdown analysis is that you bring economics into that conversation. You say, how much does this cost? How much will it save us in the long run? And what I think is really possible and important when we bring those conversations to a local scale then is like, how many jobs are we creating through this work? Like, what does this look like when the rubber really hits the road? I'll walk through just a little bit of an example of solar. So looking at rooftop solar in Lancaster. This is some data from Google's Project Sunroof. So there's a lot of tools that you can go online and see what the solar production could be for your individual rooftop and see, like, this is how many kilowatt hours we could generate in a year. But you can use the same types of tools to look at the county as a whole, or the city. And you can see from that what's the overall generating potential in this entire region. How big are the roofs, like how many of this sized roof and this sized roof. And we took that and worked with Paradise Solar, local solar installer. They gave us average costs for installation for each of those different sized systems. They also told us how many labor hours it would take to install systems of those different sizes. So, like, for the first time, we can get a real idea of what the viable rooftop solar area is in the county, and the max installed capacity, and how many labor hours it would take to install that kind of distributed array. And then if you did that by a certain date, like 2040 or some fun date in the future, how many employees would it take to do that? And what would the total reduction of emissions and contribution of our present consumption would that provide? So do you see the shift that this makes? Instead of the idea of some type of solution being some sort of amorphous, like, maybe we should do more of that here, you can get a much more, like, high resolution idea of, this is why it's important here, this is what it can do, and this is the real economic impact of doing this kind of work in our community. So I bring up solar because it's one of the most clear-cut things that we have a lot of experience doing already in Lancaster. But this is just a glimpse of an array of different solutions that we've been working on and the potential contributions that they could have. So we're doing this work. There's a lot of assumptions in this. We're trying to make them really clear. We want them to get better. What we're looking at is, what would the contribution be if we applied this to the maximum capacity, but hope to then eventually develop scenarios where we're thinking through, what's really reasonable, what's the most likely scenario for these different solutions as we move forward. But this is a glimpse. We talked earlier, as we broke apart the emissions profile and looked at the contributions from households, businesses, and farms and agriculture. And I wanted to take some time to step through each of those categories to see what the solutions are and ways that you can get engaged into that work right now. So starting with households, these are some of the key solutions that are present for that, and you'll see a lot of themes and connections here to the different sites and the different places that you can go to hear other talks here today. But of course, transportation is a really big deal. Switching from internal combustion to electric vehicles. There is a site today dedicated to heating, cooling, different home energy use, as well as solar. Food is an incredible source of our individual profiles, the fraction of meat that's a part of that, and at the very least, how that meat is raised. And then finally, finances. Your money is doing things while you just keep it somewhere. And it's important to know what those things are and what the impacts of that are. Who are the companies that are running around profiting for you, doing all kinds of wild things in the world that you might not approve of. So this is a glimpse of the solutions. I'll dive into some of the ways that RegenAll is working and where you can engage here. One of the first ones is something you can do today. We have a pledge that you can make to drop a ton of CO2. And we have different ways to help you figure out what a ton of CO2 would be and begin to plan for that over 2023 so that you can begin better understanding where emissions are coming from and how you can do something about it. We also recognize that this is a really complicated process as you start thinking through your climate action plan for your home and work to make changes. And so one of the things that we're working to develop is a navigator program. So we are training volunteers to come into your home and sit with you and figure out what your goals and priorities are, and be able to also pull down different funds from the Inflation Reduction Act to make those changes really possible. It's complicated. So over the past year, in our house, we did insulation, air sealing, solar, mini splits, domestic hot water heat pump, and triple pane windows. And it was over 100 calls and texts and phone calls with contractors, and it took a year. And I have an architectural engineering degree. Like, I like this stuff, but it's still a lot, and it's a challenge. So we want to try to do anything that we can to make this a lot easier, and dream of a time where, like, think of the lead abatement program at the city, where we do similar kind of turnkey work for home energy stuff, where in a few days we can coordinate a bunch of different contractors to come in and extreme home makeover edition your house for energy work. So these are some of the things that we're dreaming about for the future and how the Navigator program works into this. But I also want to say that if that kind of, like, digging into that type of work is something that would excite you, we're looking for more navigators and would really love your help with that. I want to spend a second on why electrification is a core part of home work. And there's other sources that I'll point to for this one that people around me are probably tired of me talking about, but Saul Griffith is one of the co-founders of Rewiring America, a mechanical engineer from MIT. I think has one of the clearest visions of how we go forward and how we make all of this work. But a core of that has been electrification, and a key reason for that is that 42% of, we would only need 42% of the source energy that we currently mine if we were to electrify all of our systems in our households. We also see real opportunity for actually capturing wins from the eventual decarbonization of the grid. So, like, think about all the things in your home, in your cars that are on fossil fuels now. One of the big changes from the development of the Build Back Better plan was that we had really valid strategies for how to make the grid run on renewables by, like, 2035, 2040. And it would cost a lot of money, but the plans are there. The plans are in a public realm for the first time, and at some point that will be politically feasible. So if we don't change our household infrastructure to a place where we could benefit from that, a grid-wide change won't have that sweeping benefit. And removing combustion from homes makes us safer and healthier. So I talked about the different types of machines that are in our homes. There's about 5-ish in all of Lancaster's 200,000 homes. So we're looking at like 1 million machines. And this is a real core part of Saul Griffith's work, imagining all of these individual units that we are working with. He also talks about the market adoption rates of different technologies over time and shows how steep the challenge is. So this is one of the graphs that could keep me awake at night if I had problems sleeping. But it shows how, like, a high carbon tax or other things that we've thought of as being a really ambitious way to go about climate work still have a really pretty slow curve across time compared to, like, replacement of every different household machine correctly at its end of life, or a magic wand where it all just happens, But then where this gets scary is mapping this to different climate degree profiles. So looking at how much time we have with these different replacement strategies to get to 1.5, 2, or 3 degrees. And it shows how almost all of those market rate things put us on track for 3 degrees of warming, which is really kind of scary. So I talked about the Inflation Reduction Act and how much is really there, and would refer you to this rewiring website as a starting place to begin to explore the resources that are available right now. You can just put in zip code and some very simple information, and then it gives you the amount of rebates, and then lower on the website are tax benefits for doing this type of decarbonizing work. As I mentioned, we're developing the Navigator program to help people walk through this. We also have more self-guided tools for developing a climate action plan for your household, and also a carbon footprint calculator on our website, so you can really dive in and figure out where you are. And then we are developing a local carbon offset marketplace. So there are already places where you can pay money to fund projects somewhere in the world that are working to remove emissions through different types of projects. But we feel that it would mean more if we were doing that here in our community, and you could see the projects that were doing that work, and that we had local groups of people that were keeping an eye on how those funds were used to improve equity in our communities as well. So you can also purchase offsets right now. We'll give you a yard sign if you've purchased offsets that make your home carbon neutral. And we have a community climate fund oversight committee that is working to then direct those toward some pilot projects that we're working to stand up in agriculture, and silvopasture, and methane capture on small manure storages, and then also heat pumps and solar in low-income homes. Here today, and I'll put this up afterwards, and you'll probably see it on some of the handouts around, you have an opportunity to start to engage with the Community Climate Fund by making just today a carbon neutral day. So this is a chance to do that. Ways to get involved in the household work through Drop a Ton, the Make Earth Day a carbon neutral day. Go on our website and develop your own climate action plan, or write to us and schedule time with a navigator to help you walk through that and the options that are available to you. We'd also love if you signed up to be a navigator to really learn the ropes of what opportunities are for households and help other people with that. There's a talk from Dave, who introduced me here today, at the Ware Center, I think at noon, about climate action neighborhoods. So we gain power by how many people we're working with, and the folks in Hamilton Park neighborhood have been doing some really awesome work over the past couple of years, looking at what we can do together for climate as this neighborhood of us. And then finally, consider offsetting your household emissions through our local Community Climate Fund. From a business standpoint, remember this was the industrial and commercial emissions combined were over half of our emissions here in the county. So here, take a look at a slightly different set of solutions. Really important here are how our products are made. First, what the product is itself. There are really creative people all around the world working to make things like concrete much less carbon intensive. And then the process for how our products are made. Think of all the energy that goes into melting and refining metals. but also the facilities where we're manufacturing things, the supply chains for how the component parts of the things that we make are coming together, and what energy is powering that. There's a lot to think about here, and there's a lot that we can do. There's also people that are beginning to come together to think about this. We have every fourth Thursday, there's a carbon neutral coffee held at the Commons Company that's really designed for people who want to dive in and think about how their businesses can engage this type of work. Over the past 2 years, RegenAll has done a lot of different climate strategy support to help businesses and organizations and communities understand what their emissions profiles are and develop climate action plans for moving forward. So ways that you can get involved and engaged with this work itself are through the Carbon Neutral Coffee. We also have a bunch of local sustainability managers. If your company isn't big enough to have a person fully dedicated to sustainability, there's folks that really want to bring this transformation into their company. I'd love to talk to you if that's you, and find ways to bring more support for climate work in the local business community. Bring us in to develop a greenhouse gas inventory and climate action plan. RegenAll has a bunch of other partners that can help do that work as well. And finally, consider offsetting emissions through the Community Climate Fund. You would have options to do that elsewhere, but to create a real deeper connection here with your community, I think is really a valuable part. Then the third category is farms. This is an area where I've gotten to work quite a bit over the last couple of years. And there's a lot of big opportunities for change. It's really the one industry where it's difficult, but you could imagine not only removing all emissions, but potentially sending it negative. We have a lot of really wonderful collaborations forming with local milk cooperatives, through other companies that are looking at their supply chains and saying, we need to make these transformations, and we want to help farmers to do that right here. A few of the core areas of those solutions, one is in methane capture, because methane has a pretty steep 26+% multiplier over CO2 in its effectiveness or its impact for warming. Nitrogen management, so a lot of commercial fertilizer work. How we grow food on land. How we're paying attention to soil health, to different rotations and cover crop scenarios. And there's folks, Steve Groff will be talking about a lot of that here today. Then there's a lot of creative work being done in the realm of agroforestry, especially in silvopasture. So that's bringing more trees into other productive agricultural landscapes. So silvopasture is trees in grazing operations. We already have a lot of work in riparian buffer development on farms because of the focus on the Chesapeake Bay. And then a fifth section is in energy. We still don't have any kind of agrivoltaics projects that I'm aware of in Lancaster where there are sheep grazing in amongst solar panels. There's some that even have guard llamas, which is just great, that help protect the sheep. So anyway, places where you can get involved into this kind of work. Learn more about the local farmers who are really leading in this, and buy their food. Really, your support helps to make a different paradigm possible. Consider offsetting your emissions through the Community Climate Fund, which a large portion of those funds are to be directed toward projects that are on farms. And then also, if you're a farmer or you have agricultural land that you want to steward in a more regenerative way, let us know, because we have partners that can really help out to bring that vision to life. And a lot of this stuff happens. We see this in the water conservation world, like with riparian buffers all the time, where when people can see it, and they've seen an example of it, and it's not so scary, they can participate. So we need more examples that are visible of people doing really awesome stuff in agriculture. So if a lot of these things spark excitement for you, you're in luck, because there's a climate summit today. And you're here, and there's a bunch of different sites, like Dave mentioned before, and these are the different core solutions areas that all of those sites are focused on. So you are in the right place at the right time to dive into a lot of this stuff and meet so many amazing partners that we've gotten to work with all around the county that are doing really wonderful things. So as I'm closing here, I want to dive into that last piece. What makes Lancaster so unique in this work? And this is what really gets me excited about us being here. So first, I think we need to recognize that really awesome stuff has happened in Chesapeake Bay cleanup work over the last 40-some years. And I know there are still lots of articles that highlight the deficiencies that remain in this kind of stuff. And there's definitely a lot more to do, but a lot of incredible things have happened. And I want to cheer for that. For example, 47% of the acreage, this was as of 2010, so you can imagine that this has increased quite a bit since then. 47% of Lancaster is in cover crop and no-till, which is some of the really core parts of conservation agriculture, some of the entry rungs of more regenerative work. But this is exciting. I also want to recognize what it's taken to do this. That over the past 40 years, there have been a lot of organizations that are dedicated to this really difficult implementation work on the ground. And I've gotten to see this firsthand through Team Ag. But like Lancaster Clean Water Partners is an amazing group that's pulled together this many organizations. We have 47 organizations that are working for clean water regionally. And it comes at all of these different tiers. So these are our federal and state partners, county partners, working through nonprofits and other foundation funders that make projects teed up for technical service providers like I work for at Team Ag to make happen. Local watershed partners that are doing this work on the ground too and helping to make all these things work together, but like see how much this is. And like map what we have working in the watershed realm and then look over at the climate space and compare the challenges. I would say that we have an equally immense challenge over in climate. We need to do very similar work of engaging with every parcel. Like we understand how hard it is over multi-year relationships to work with a farmer and to introduce new things and to make this stuff happen. Implementation is really hard. And I think that's something that Lancaster's understood from doing this work. And I think it's not understood at the national level with climate. I think it's a really important asset that we have right here for having a sense of what that takes. I think there's been a vision or an idea that some magical climate bill will happen, and infrastructure, or the IRA is nice, but it's a fraction of what Build Back Better was originally designed to be, and that was a small amount compared to what is really needed to make a lot of this happen. So there's been a dream that some massive program will just come and then it'll all happen. The people who are most in tune with the Inflation Reduction Act work when it passed took some time to celebrate. It was good for them. But they also recognized that we have just earned the opportunity to come to the starting line of the work that needs to move forward. And so that's really where we are with climate. And I think this just cannot be understated. Another thing that's a real asset here is that there's an awesome study from the Yale Center on Climate Change Communication where they ask all kinds of different questions all around the US, and they brought that data together and showed how do people respond to like 30 different questions on global climate change. And here in counties with the demographics like Lancaster, they show that 64% of adults think that citizens should do more to address global warming. So people are with this idea. A strong majority of people want this work to happen. Another thing that I think we're dealing with, back to the hope of some grand thing, is that we've waited for leaders to just do this. And hopefully they continue to do more. But remember, we have enough here. Like we've got what we need to make really awesome stuff happen. And so that's something that I really think that we need to take away from this. And finally, Lancaster is a really special place. And a lot of people have noticed this from the outside. Maybe we get too excited about it. But y'all remember the article from Thomas Friedman a couple years ago about this being a place where American politics can still work from the bottom up? And I know you've probably been in some meetings and conversations with anybody where you feel like this might not be real, or maybe he didn't stay for long enough. But I think there's something to this, that Lancaster does things that you wouldn't expect Lancaster to do. And I think we can build on this. So I want to talk about, bring those things all together. I think Lancaster has a really meaningful scale. Like it's not too big, it's not too small. It's like the Goldilocks of counties, you know? We're close to all these major cities. It's probably one of the reasons why Chesapeake Bay stuff has happened, because people are looking at it. It has a really strong brand. If you go somewhere and say, I'm from Lancaster, people say, yeah, sweet, I know where that is. We've made a lot of progress already. If you compare the ruralness and urbanness of Lancaster to the US, it's off by a fraction of a percent. Like Lancaster, I think, is surprisingly representative of the rest of the US, at least in that one ruralness and urbanness metric. And we've done a lot of things that you wouldn't expect. So I'd like you all to imagine with me that it's 2040. Okay? So we're at the 18th annual Climate Summit, and it's a celebration. This is the year where we reached carbon neutrality as a county. We shut down Penn Square for the party, and we stretched long tables up and down the middle of King Street for a massive farm-to-table feast. Yeah, the impacts of climate change are worse, but we're ready, and it makes us more resilient. Storms are more intense, and droughts are more frequent, but the work farmers have done caring for their health of their soils helps them to weather the variations. Collectively, we've made big investments in our homes and businesses. We've created thousands of jobs, more comfortable buildings, and we're achieving better health outcomes as a result. As we approach the final payoff dates for many of these loans, we're realizing that our investments will retain billions of dollars in the county each year that used to leave Lancaster for fossil fuels. It's really different moving around downtown these days. People have such a wide variety of emissions-free transportation. It's so easy to go anywhere you need to go. Bikes are everywhere, as well as many small electric vehicles people can summon on demand. And the trolleys have made an astonishing comeback. The big shift really was in our collective imagination. We let go of the idea that things are always destined to get worse. And we now dream of how we can work together to build a stronger Lancaster that works for all of us. We also recognized how interconnected our challenges are and how interconnected the opportunities are. We started to see work on climate as a thread that united and strengthened existing efforts around housing affordability, water quality, community health, and so many other things we had already cared about. People from around the world are coming to Lancaster to see how we do it, how an idea that is still often a contentious political flashpoint at a national scale has become a force that unites us locally. And we're proud of what Thomas Friedman put out in his latest piece about Lancaster, the Pennsylvania town where climate action is actually working.